I really feel like trust scales through people now. It no longer scales through institutions, which also makes me sad. But I think that is the reality that we are living in.
Hi, welcome back to The Campaign Strategist, where we dig into the art and science of campaigns and advocacy. Today's guest is Amanda Brink, Executive Director of the Empower Project. Amanda has spent much of her career thinking about how organizations communicate in a world where trust has shifted away from institutions and toward everything and anything else. As media continues to fragment and technology reshapes how we consume information, campaigns and advocacy organizations that I work with are wrestling with the same challenge. How do you build authentic relationships with the people you're trying to reach? I wanted to talk with Amanda after I read her short essay called The Rules of Engagement Have Changed, which she published in June. Her argument is that real organizing now happens online, in the group chats, discussion threads, and comment sections where people are already deciding who to trust and what's true. That space that the right has figured out while the left largely hasn't. Her essay is a sharp, quick read, and I'd encourage everyone listening to look it up. Amanda's work sits right in the middle of this question. Today, I'm going to explore what she's learning, how she's thinking about the future of organizing, and what advocacy organizations should be doing differently if they want to build lasting trust. If you find this discussion helpful, please share and subscribe. It really helps more people find the show. And now, let's get into it. Amanda, welcome to The Campaign Strategist. I'm so glad to have you as a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, I think a lot of folks agree that if not everyone, that the communications environment has changed dramatically over the last decade. And before we talk about organizing technology, what problem are campaigns and advocacy organizations actually trying to solve today?
I think they're competing I think they're trying to get democratic and progressive messaging out the door. And they're just competing in a wildly different environment because now we're competing in the attention economy where we have a president who just throws out wild things literally every day. And so a lot of people are struggling with fatigue in regards to that. But I also think that it means that our messages are having a harder time breaking through in the attention economy where we have to balance not just for people, do we have the right messaging, but are people actually hearing it and digesting it? Because we're now running around with miniature computers in our pocket that we constantly scroll through. And so it's just not the communications environment that it was even 4 or 5 years ago, certainly not 10 or 15 years ago. And things are just changing very rapidly.
Well, you wrote very recently a fantastic essay called The Rules of Engagement Have Changed. And that really struck me because you grappled with how this current attention economy works, the fatigue that people are facing with this constant input, and also pointed out that much more persuasion and organizing is actually taking place online, much like if folks who are familiar with the book and movie Ready Player One know there's an offline world and then the online world, but much more actual life is lived by people in the online space. And I thought that was a good analogy because that is where so much of public opinion is now shaped and molded. And can you talk about that? Because I think that not everybody's realizing that so much of what is emerging to drive our politics is basically being shaped in comment sections and chat rooms.
I think it's all being shaped in comment sections and chat rooms, to be honest with you. I think that, so if you haven't read the book, it's Ernest Cline's Ready Player One. In 2018, 2019, Steven Spielberg turned it into a movie. And in the movie or in the book, this is where they go to school. This is where they get married. This is where all of these things happen. And I think we're not quite there yet. The robots haven't fully taken over, but we are heading in that direction. And we were heading in that direction And then it was like sped along / expedited by COVID, right? We couldn't go outside. And so
Yeah.
people who were searching for community out of loneliness and struggling privately started engaging online in a much more significant way. It was, you know, it was always happening, but COVID sped it up, right? And I came from organizing. I have very, very fond memories of going out and door knocking in Iowa or phone banking. And the reality is that now people who come to your door, that's weird. It just is. It's weird. There's no kids that come to sell candy bars. There's no neighbor children who are like, hey, can I weed your flowers? That doesn't really happen anymore. And I'd love to say that we have all these fond memories of what it meant to campaign 20 years ago. And a lot of those tactics are just atrophying. And people have always processed information in community, right? When we used to run campaigns, we would be like, we need to educate people about candidate XYZ, right? Now everybody's running around with a computer in their pocket, right? They don't need, we don't need to educate them. They have access to all the information they could ever possibly want. We need to make sure that that information is actually getting to them and they're paying attention to it. And ultimately, there's this thing called homophily, which is like birds of a flat feather flock together. You want to be like your people group. And so people are processing information in community and to get together. And I think that people's opinions are being formed by the group chat, the WhatsApp group, the Instagram DMs, the water cooler conversations at work. It's no longer the case that we are just going to deliver these magic 75 words to somebody and they are going to run to our side. They will process this in community with the people that they identify with and then make a decision based off of that. And so we need to be in all of these spaces processing in community with them. And I think the right has acknowledged this and has come up with a plan for it and is attacking this problem at a much larger scale than we on the progressive left are. And I think we got to catch up.
What do you think it is about the comment sections or these community spaces that have brought them to the fore in terms of what's in shaping what people think and how they behave politically?
I think that people have declining trust in politicians now and declining trust in institutions across the board. Call Wisconsin home. There was a Marquette poll that came out like the second week of July, and it basically ranks like who do adults based off of age group trust. Okay. And it's like your local elected, people in your neighborhood, your local elected official, members of Congress, stranger who knocks on your door. Like it keeps going. And so I think people are trying to figure out who to trust and who to believe because there's so much coming at them and they digest that information in community. I don't know if you've ever read this book called Messengers. It's like who we listen to, who we don't, and why, by two guys named Steve Martin and Joseph Marks, and not Steve Martin, the actor. It's Steve Martin, the like behavioral scientist, PhD nerd guy. Yes. Anyway, they basically make the case and they have some, again, actual behavioral scientists have data to prove this, that if I told you that the moon is purple, you would believe me or not believe me based off of whether or not you think that I am a credible messenger. And so in many ways, we are organizing in a post-truth or post-fact world, which is really hard for lefties to get our head around because we value education and a bunch of other things. But whether or not you believe Donald Trump on television has to do with whether or not you believe anything that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, less so than the actual words coming out of his mouth. Whether or not you believe a Democratic politician also has to do with how you feel about them, less so the words, whether or not the words are actually factual. And that's a really hard thing for us to get our heads around. But I think it's true, and I think we have to accept that.
Yeah, I think that institutions, so, and I think about think tanks or environmental groups that I've worked for, had the power to shape a debate, a discussion, because sort of the institutionality and it's sort of the reputation for credibility. And people just are no longer willing to just grant the fact that you're a well-known institution with lots of smarty pants inside, that therefore you're right. So, and if trust has become what needs to be the movement's most valuable assets, how should organizations think differently about building that trust?
So at Empower Project, you probably checked out the website, or somebody who's listening to the podcast. We are full believers in friend-to-friend social organizing. And so we believe that we have to build networks of humans from the ground up in order to make progress. Because we think that trusted messengers is the entire ballgame now. And you can agree with us or disagree with us, but I think that is the direction that we are headed as a movement. And I think that, like, it's hard to get your head around because it's less about perfect messaging and it's more about building power. And that's the thing that I think that we need to shift our focus towards. Like, when you think about the civil rights movement or you think about the suffrage movement, it didn't start through Democratic elected officials or Republican elected officials. It started in churches and basements and on streets, and a woman who wouldn't sit in the back of the bus. It didn't start with candidates. It started with grassroots movement, and it started with basic tower building. And I think we have to get back to that.
Yeah, just in an online space. So how are organizations building those networks of individuals to carry the non-precise messaging forward, or to engage in all of those discussions in all of these places? How do organizations do that?
I think that there are some organizations who are trying to do this through creators and creator systems. Influencers, some might call them. And I think that is interesting and something we should definitely be exploring. I think that labor unions who are really enjoy the trust of their membership and are frankly very highly respected in today's times do that through their member-to-member organizing, do that through their worksite organizing, do that through basically their people-to-people in-person storytelling. And I think that is very important. And then I hope that more Democratic campaigns start to employ these tactics in the same vein. I think we've seen some positive things from like the John Ossoffs of the world, as well as say what you want about Mamdani, but he is a good communicator who has built a little online army, right? And I know he's controversial because he might be a socialist or he might not be a socialist or whatever, but dude's a good communicator. Dude is organizing people everywhere, right? And that says something. And I think that says a lot about the kind of modern campaigns that we need to build that don't just ask people to go out and knock on doors or ask people to make phone calls, but engage everywhere on their behalf all at once, right? In Instagram DMs, in Reddit threads, in WhatsApp groups, in all of these spaces that campaigns can't buy their way into through paid ads. Right?
Well, when people talk about Mamdani, I mean, in the media, generally it's like, boy, he really knows how to communicate with people. He really knows how to make videos. But that sounds like that's only part of it, right? Then you also have to have a way of enlisting the people who are already starting to follow you. And let's assume it starts with a relatively small number. What do you ask them to carry these conversations into whatever social spaces they're part of? Or what are the sort of mechanics of how it works?
Yeah, you basically, relational organizing, friend-to-friend organizing grows like a hockey stick. It grows exponentially. I used to have to explain what exponentially meant, and then COVID happened, and people know about exponential growth now.
There was an upside to it.
But basically, relational organizing programs start small, and then they start to grow, and they start to grow rapidly. And I think it is getting buy-in from a couple of key players and asking them to ask their friends. Do you ever go and stalk the Republicans' Center for Campaign Information, like R&D lab website? No. Okay.
No, but it sounds
One,
interesting.
one good for you. On the left, we have this entity called the Analyst Institute that does basically research around what campaign tactics are effective and what campaign tactics are not effective. Anyway, on the right, they have something called the Center for Campaign Innovation. I'm probably saying it wrong, but somebody will find it. Anyway, they have started doing a bunch of randomized control trials, and they have started getting into the idea of relational organizing. They're starting to do their randomized control trials, and you can learn a little bit about what it is that they're doing. Some of the other interesting pieces are basically that they go out into the world and they basically test messaging and they test content and see what goes viral. They just test it in the real world. They don't run polls in the same way that we do. They do some polling, right? But they test it in the real world. And then they're like, oh, that caught fire. Let's keep doing more of that. And then the next thing, it's on a television ad. And we start from the other direction where we have a few key chosen people who are crafting messages and then try to distribute it outwards. And they are coming from the bottom up, which is frankly, in an attention economy, quite could be winning, right? Because they're just like, let's throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And then when some of it sticks, they run with it.
I didn't actually realize they had a dedicated institute for that. My impression had been, and probably both are true, is that because you can measure how much engagement does a particular post get, along with, likes and so on, and that is the engagement, views, etc., you can quickly see what's actually taking off or what approach to talking about a particular topic or what keywords seem to be really resonating. And it does seem as though the right is also better at keeping an eye on what the others are doing. And when they see something that works, they tend to glom onto that. And so they are able to ride something that works a lot further because they will cross-post, cross-fertilize. They're just after what works. And I've worked at large institutional organizations, and I've been one of those people who was like, I got to see that press release before it goes out, and we'll have edits, right? And it just goes on forever.
Mm-hmm.
How are organizations that have been doing this communications thing in one way for many years or decades, are they able to adapt? Are some able to adapt? Or is it more generally sort of newer organizations that are quicker to understand this is how this works now and they more naturally get into it? And I'm asking because I do worry about, sort of from an evolutionary perspective, if organizations that have been around doing communications in a certain way for many, many years, can they adapt? And I do, audiences influence, we have to adapt or die. And so I'm really interested in what are the ways that we get organizations to change the approach and to adopt what are a whole bunch of new approaches.
Yeah, I think that we as a movement have something called status quo bias, right? It's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? I think of maintaining the status quo as just a slower form of decline. And sometimes that means that I faceplant into the wall. But to be honest with you, I think we have to do things that are hard and often scary. And that can really be challenging for some folks. I think what we've seen is somebody will be like, let's just try this a little bit. Let's just try it a little bit and see what happens. And then if we try it a little bit and it works out and we start to see a lot of progress on it, then we will invest more in it next cycle. And I think that's good. And that's a good way to approach it. But I also think we aren't moving fast enough. And I really feel like we're in a place where we have to build power and we have to build. I don't want to be one of those people who's like, this is the most important election of our lifetime, because we say that every election. But it does kind of start to feel like our democracy is maybe collapsing, right?
Yes. Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
it is
it's
scary to be at this precipice. I want to go back to something that you mentioned a little bit ago, which is so some groups are working with creators or influencers,
Mhm.
which is different than what you're talking about here, because you're talking about organizations have to build up their own audiences. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of the difference in working with creators and gaining some exposure that way versus building up from the ground your own audience?
Yeah, I think the relationship between creators and their followers is a parasocial relationship, right? So it's like I identify with the white lady that does the get ready with me videos on Instagram. And so when she says, hey, check out this serum, I generally do that. And creators can inject politics, even light versions of politics, into their content. And that can influence their followers because their followers feel trust with that individual.
Mhm.
But I also think that what we do in Power is friend to friend social organizing. And I think a lot of your more traditional, progressive, left leaning organizations are also starting to do what we do or fold into the programs that we're running. So in 2024, we had 47,000, we call them community mobilizers. So people who made lists of their friends and family and went out and had one-to-one conversations with them. And then also posted on their own social media platforms about issues on the left
Did
or
they have those one-on-one conversations in person, or you mean online,
mixed
or
bag.
both?
So text messaging, Instagram
Okay,
DMs, WhatsApp,
got it. Okay,
are they prohibited from doing online conversations or in-person conversations? No, but it's a mix of telephone and the way in which they
okay.
normally communicate, right? And we ran a pretty big program in 2024. In this year, we've already passed 1 million conversations this year. We're currently up in 16 states. And so we really feel like this is part of what Democratic campaigns and independent expenditure groups should be doing in 2026. And then there are a lot of entities that are also doing the creator work to try to get into this trust building, trusted messenger programs, as opposed to just cold door knocking, paid canvases, cold texting, and cold phone banking. Because you've probably seen the stats where the DNC, like the contact rates are just like, who answers the phone anymore for unknown caller? No one. No one.
I had such a, this felt so, the challenge of the in-person conversations now really came home to me when I was door knocking in Pennsylvania for
Ooh,
Vice President Harris. And
how'd that go?
say again.
How'd it go?
They mostly had us just bolstering, you know, people with Democratic high scores, but occasionally I'd run into somebody who was, undecided. But it was different last year or in 2024 because, the eye contact, you can tell if somebody's really actually listening to what you're saying. And I felt like even in those conversations, whether I stuck to the script or whether I, improvised in order to try to match more closely to my interpretation of the person, it was just like glazed over eyes. And I was just thinking, I've just had 2 to 5 minutes of conversation with this person, but before that, they've had how many hundreds of hours of whatever they've been digesting. And then after I'm gone, they've got hundreds and hundreds of hours more that they're going to digest from wherever they're getting their information. And it's one of the things where I really could feel this has to be all the time, always on, because that is how opinions are being shaped now. It's not, I think there is greater awareness. You can't just start your ad campaigns in September, October, because people pretty much are already getting locked in by then, but not enough. So that was when it is interesting to just feel it on such a personal level. And I'm guessing that's part of what you're also, is being reflected in the numbers, and the experience of just trying to do the quick conversations at the door just don't have the same kind of impact that they used to.
No, and I wish they did. I've had such fond
Yeah.
memories. Like, I used to knock doors in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and you strike up a conversation with, next thing you're in their house asking to use the bathroom. You still build community that way. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it just doesn't work anymore. And I'm sad about that. But some things are not coming back. I also think that at this point in time as a movement, we're also struggling with everybody used to watch broadcast television, and that's not true anymore either.
Right.
And a lot of the tactics that we have built our campaigns around are just atrophying, and they haven't fallen off a cliff yet, but we have to start planning. We have to start planning for the future.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I really feel like trust scales through people now. It no longer scales through institutions, which also makes me sad. But I think that is the reality that we are living in. I also think that communications, no matter words, no matter how perfectly crafted, if they don't get out into the world and we're not building power, they don't matter. And I don't know if that's the forest, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it analogy, but kinda, right? And in an attention economy, you have to up the volume. And I think that means we need more people involved. More people involved. We need more messengers, and we need to accept that they aren't going to be perfect. But we need a little army in order to get out of the moment that we are in.
So, yeah, I do think the tree in the forest analogy is right on, because if you have the perfect message and nobody hears it, it doesn't help you at all. I'm curious about, I had one other question about creators, because I do see a lot of groups sort of going to that as their first step to adaptation. And I view particularly specifically the paid creator relationships, it's sort of like how you should use paid media, at least from an advocacy organization perspective, which is my background. You use it sparingly because it costs a lot of money. But doesn't it seem like if you're trying to get your message out through creators, you're borrowing an audience instead of building your own? Is that a valid way to look at least one of the differences between the approaches?
I feel like if political institutions start building their own audiences, I get what you're saying. They're just going to get political followers. So if you look at Under the Desk News, who I like and is lovely, and I follow her, all she has is activist Amy followers. And I think if we want to get back to the persuadables and we want to move more people into our bucket, we have to find the, I don't know, get ready with me, the woman who's teaching me how to put more protein into my diet.
Yeah.
Talk about politics a little bit, and that can bring people in. But I think as long as we are I think in the same way that I think only weird people answer polls now. I'm sorry, I said what I said. Right?
That's okay.
Right. Sorry, I said what I said.
They probably won't see this. That's fine.
But if you want your everyday everyday average person to engage with the content, you need to put an everyday person in front of them, and then try to bridge them over. So while I get it,
what do you mean? What do you mean by bridge them over?
I think the world that is the internet, aka the Oasis, is a lean right space. And we need to show people that left values can be fun, that progressive values mean something. Yeah.
The to be fun got me thinking about Anat is fond of saying, if you want a bigger party, you have to throw a better party.
Yeah. So I was at this conference, and I'm going to mess this up, but basically they put together a poll, a focus group, and it was something like, there's a party of Democrats and everybody in the room is a lefty, describe the people at the party. And it was everybody is very PC. No one is fun. They all have their rescue dogs at the event. Nobody's turned the music up too loud. Everybody's being totally appropriate, and nobody's really talking because there's nothing to really talk about. And it just was like, oh, this is the lamest party in the planet. Who would want to go to this? And it was like people who were like, I vote for Democrats, and this is what I think a party full of Democrats would be like. And we have to get out of that.
Yeah, I got to say one thing for people who would go to Trump rallies, and that is they sure did look like they were having fun and enjoying themselves. And even in the real world manifestation, I think there's a lesson in that, which is that people want to belong to something that is fun and enjoyable, that they'd want to go back to, even aside from whatever political overlay there may be. And I do remember reading about like Talking Points USA, which was really also good at creating real world events that would bring people in. And that's how they were building up their base, that people didn't even necessarily agree with the political perspectives before they got there. They just, maybe a friend or a relative or somebody invited them and said, we just have a lot of fun, and they're all dressed up in goofy ways and, being very over the top. And I get it that, yeah, well, if you're throwing a fun party, sure, more people want to be there and participate.
Yeah, there's a study on the books about how women convert to being part of the pro-life movement, and most of them weren't pro-life to start. They were just looking for a community.
Yeah, and that to me is something that's pretty counterintuitive, but is a really important thing to get. Is sometimes it's the community that draws your potential audience in, and then starts to convert them or shift them to the point of view that you're working for.
I think in an attention economy, we are advertising our community and how we want more people in it. And we're not advertising our values. Advertising is the wrong word, but we're not communicating our values enough to get more people into our tent all the time. I think 2026 is going to be a year where we are going to capture the pissed off voters, the people who are like, I'm mad at Donald Trump. My gas prices are too high. We've done this crap in Iran, blah, 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 blah. And they will come to us, and we have to figure out how to keep them. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we keep them through building relationships with them and showing them that we can be fun and we can throw a fun party that people want to go to. Yeah. And that's,
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, that's part of what we try to do at Empower with the friend-to-friend social organizing, is get people in community together talking about political stuff and talking about civic engagement and talking about how good resources and what resources are available, and why who's in the White House makes a difference to them, or why who is in the city hall makes a difference in their life, by everything from protecting, plowing, and paving their roads to their tax base at the gas pump, or their tax base in their paycheck, which touches the food on their table. So
what do you think makes someone want to, or at least be willing to be one of those, I forget the term you used, the individuals that, yes, will reach out to and start proselytizing to their contact? Because that's not everybody.
No.
So what kind, like, how do you identify those people, or there's just always going to be some percentage of people who will respond and who want to do that? What makes them different?
So when we go to a state, we literally will just ask a bunch of people if they want to participate, and a very, very tiny percentage of people say yes. And then we get them in the program, we get them building community, we get them having a good time, and then they will invite their friends. And so I'm not asking any sort of magic question. I'm asking them who else they know who could join and who could participate, and it grows from there. And like I said, in 2024, we had 47,000 community mobilizers. They built lists from their phones of 3 million people, and they had 9 million conversations. And that sounds crazy.
Incredible.
it sounds totally crazy.
Yeah.
Like, that's a bonkers number. But each of them had 190 conversations over the course of 6 or 7 weeks.
What?
Like, it's not nuts, right?
So,
Yeah,
asking on behalf of my audience, how
sure.
do you make it a good time?
Oh, I think that some people are looking for community. And when we ask people to join the program, they come to a Zoom, they meet a real person. We make an app. Empower Project makes an app for that. The app is just a tool. In the same way, you can't build a house with just a hammer. A tool is not enough. And we have one staff person for every 250 mobilizers who's responsible for
Hmm.
building a relationship with them, maintaining a relationship with them, and making sure that they're having a good time in the program. Yeah, this is not, I would love to tell you that we built this magic app and you just click some buttons and now we are winning. This requires people. It turns out
It's people power.
it turns out that when trust scales through people, not institutions, you need people to scale the trust. I know. I say crazy things.
No, I love that encapsulation. So suppose you're sitting down tomorrow morning with the executive director of some national advocacy organization. What are the first three things you tell them to change, and why those three?
It depends on what they're currently doing, but I would encourage them to lean into their current network as opposed to going out and
Mm-hmm.
building from cold contacts. Okay. And even if their current network is 20 people, you can scale a program through 20 people. You just have to keep pushing it and keep saying, who else do you know? 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 So that would be my first thing. My second thing would probably be to be less afraid. So I think on the left, we are terrified that someone is going to say something and it is going to end up as a header on Twitter or X
Oh,
or
yeah.
Fox News or whatever. And
Yeah.
it is scary, but at some point you got to let go because we are literally letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Like we are the poster child for letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And then the third thing I would say is that you can run a relational organizing program and you can get friend-to-friend organizing without tech. I'm the first to tell you that we make an app for that and don't actually need
Mm-hmm.
it, but having it is pretty useful if you want to actually scale it. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense for everybody, but for the people who it does make sense for, I encourage them to make an investment in it. But the tech isn't enough. They need to put people into the program, not just create. I think one of the reasons we go back to canvassing and texting and phone banking is it's a thing you can stand up basically like tomorrow, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
great, we will cut 1 million doors into packets, we will print them, and then they will go. And it's a thing that everybody knows. And relational organizing is harder. And relational organizing, while more effective, is also takes longer to get going. But once it's
Yeah.
going, it grows up.
Problem. So looking ahead, 5 years from now, what do you think we'll realize that we misunderstood about organizing today? Or, yeah.
I think we will have potentially failed. Look, I hope this isn't true, but I think we will potentially have failed to acknowledge how rapidly the environment was changing.
Yeah, I think
Sorry.
I think that's a pretty safe estimation.
Yeah.
It just seemed like the theme here really is about trust. I mean, I was just thinking about, canvassing, phone banking. That's from the days when people I guess we're more willing to accept information or persuasion from a stranger. And people are more cautious. They're more skeptical now. And so it just really has to come from someone that they trust. Either they know already, or obviously one of the things that works with influencers is if the person feels like whoever's on the screen looks like me or sounds like me, has my values. But converting to the approach where it is actually building set upon set of relationships based on trust seems like the way to characterize the fundamentals of what's changed. Am I getting that right?
I think that's correct. Yes.
Wow.
It sounds
It does
so
sound
simple.
like a lot of work.
Exactly.
It sounds simple and also a lot of work. Yeah. All right. So what is giving you optimism right now? Who's doing work that you think that makes you think we are starting to get it?
I think that not the DNC, but the DNC had in January of 2025 did some acknowledgments that at a conference that I was at, that the contact rates were falling and we needed to innovate. And I think they also had some acknowledgement that Kamala Harris, for as amazing as she was and challenging as she was, because she was false, there were people they never could have moved because they didn't have trust with those people. And they needed outside messengers to carry the persuasion conversation to bring people to her. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. I don't know if those things have carried through to the DNC of 2026, but I have hopes that was the first time that I remember people standing up and being like, these are the parts that really went wrong. And so that was encouraging to me, because you can't fix the problem if you can't name the problem or are willing to name the problem. And so I'm hoping that is moving people in the right direction. Yeah. I also think that we're seeing a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of status quo bias, but we are seeing some people who want to try new things. And so I continue to be hopeful about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned it earlier that we're often afraid of saying the wrong thing and getting pounded, but there also seems to be a fear of experimentation and trying something and having it fail, and of course, it's one of the oldest lessons. That's how you learn. But for some reason, people are still reluctant to fail.
I also think that even when people are willing to experiment, it's incremental experimentation, existing tactics, as opposed to big, massive swings. And I think the Republicans are way more willing to take big swings than we are. And maybe it's because they have more resources, but I'm not sure that's true, to be honest with you. I'm not sure what it is.
I wonder if it comes out of that. I mean, they did go through several decades of feeling like they were locked out of power, and maybe made them more bold, but who knows? So as we wrap up, I would love to hear, what's one piece of career advice that someone gave you that stayed with you over the years?
You can't get what you don't ask for.
That's great.
Thank you for having me.
And what a great way to end. Amanda, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into The Campaign Strategist, where we dive into the art and science of advocacy. The podcast is produced by Prismatic Strategies to share wisdom and insights from leaders in the field. I'm your host, Pete Altman. Music was written by Andrea Perry and Pete Altman, and this is edited by Abby Altman. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who care about making a difference. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, and see you next time.